Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and we have back with us my good friend, Mr. Matthew Pauly. Matthew, how's it going?
Hello, Payman. I'm okay. Lots going on. Pretty busy. And how about you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a shame we don't really have much material for this episode. Nothing's happened in the world in the last week. Absolutely nothing. Everything is rosy.
Sometimes I wish I was away in a log cabin somewhere with no internet at times like this, because there's just the amount of stuff that's happening is just mind-boggling, and it's not pleasant to look at. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say it's escalated like from January 6th. For some reason, I don't know if that day had any
Mhm.
significance, but apparently something happened on that day, and everything's been blown up since then.
It certainly has. Yes. And it's really interesting how the mainstream media, especially in the States and stuff, and even in Canada, oh, Trudeau's resigned. No, he hasn't. They spun it completely. He never has resigned. He's not even, legally committed to resigning. He's just giving his word that, yes, I will resign. And once we choose a new leader, and I have to prorogue Parliament now until March 24th. Now, this is a crisis, a constitutional crisis for the country, in that we are facing one of the most vulnerable times in Canada's history, in my opinion. Certainly in the last 50 years, since perhaps the FLQ crisis in the early 70s. I mean, and even then, that was a small operation compared to this globalist thing that's happening. So we have Trump, making the motions. First, we thought he was just trolling, saying 51st state and governor Trudeau, but it's clear he's not. He's actually serious. He was asked by a reporter the other day, "Would you use military to take over to annex Canada?" And he said, "No, I wouldn't. Do the military, but I would use economic pressure." And we already know he's already announced 25% tariffs to all of the trading partners because they want to like make America first again. So that means on top of that, he's willing to impose other tariffs and other punishments on Canada. So Canada is facing this. Now, who has been the most disrespectful politician in Canada towards Trump, who is now the president of the United States of America, the most powerful country in the world? Well, it was Justin Trudeau, of course. He has repeatedly humiliated the MAGA movement and compared it, to Nazis and such. And now Big Brother next door is now in power. And so, do we really think that it's a time that he should be allowed to essentially get rid of the entire Parliament? Just him alone, with nobody, calling him accounts and accountable in question period. He's going to be the prime minister, being the sole executive of the government for the period that now, overlapping with Trump becoming the president. So this is completely wrong. It's actually a violation of the rules of proroguing. It's to suspend government business when it's in the interest of the nation. You can't use it for your own personal gain. I mean, let's look at what would be the worst case of using prorogation? Well, how about when a politician has become so irresponsible and so lost so much confidence of the population, the electorate, that even his own party, he's lost the confidence of his own party, and he decides to prorogue to avoid having a non-confidence vote and getting kicked out. That's the most abusive use of it. And that's exactly what they've done, what he's done. So we're in a crisis in this country, and we need to do something quickly to get the public to engage and advocate. And that means essentially sending a letter to the governor general, as well as making a phone call. And later on, I can pass along a link for the one click, but we can maybe put in the description as well of this interview, because we need to put pressure on the governor general, because what she did was completely against the role of the governor general. Her primary responsibility is to ensure there is a functioning a government that is got the confidence of the people at all times in the country. And that's exactly what her job is. And what has she done? She has taken and violated that entire responsibility. And now she's left the country without a functioning government at a time when the country is extremely vulnerable to, literally, I mean, it's to the point where we know that at least 10% of Canadians are saying, yeah, okay, take us now, right? And we have actually another, just an informal poll on Twitter, which said, what would you do if, the American military came in? And 10% said, I fight them. And 55% said we'd help. So if King Charles and the Commonwealth, and the monarchy, it was ever at threat, it's right now. I mean, we could lose. Canada could, is facing extreme existential threats, and so therefore it's unacceptable that we're in this situation with this Governor General has allowed this to happen on faulty advice, probably illegal advice by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So I know that's a mouthful, but
it's a good recap. A couple of questions. One, when is there a legitimate case for using prorogation?
well, I mean, I can't profess to be an expert on this by any means, but it has to be in a situation where it's in the interest of the nation that the government needs to temporarily suspend the parliament to take care of something really important, and it doesn't include things like having a leadership race because you're so unpopular that your own, not only the whole population can't stand, has no confidence from the entire population, but your own party. We just know that's clearly out of scope for a prorogue. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know of examples. I'm sorry, I can't give you more on
I
that.
can't think of anything, because it's not just that they're just like pausing it; they're dropping every bill that's in Parliament. Maybe if it's like a 5-year war and they don't want to pick up after 5 years of not debating a bill, like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, actually, and now there's a good chance for me to make one critical point. Unfortunately, they were very smart when they introduced this mother of all bills in terms of UN and WEF and WHO influence over the country. Bill C-293, the Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act, which, of course, is what our whole committee is a co-founder and organizer for right now. This is absolutely unfortunate that they had they knew what they were doing. They knew this bill was so important that they had to make it essentially prorogue proof, because it's a private member's bill. Even though this Erskine Smith, was essentially a member of the Liberals and was very active, and he's sitting with the Liberals, he puts it through as a private member's bill, which means the media doesn't cover it, the mainstream media. And because it's a private member's bill, which historically, had trouble getting through. Well, this guy has already put through another 200 series bill like a year ago that became law. And now they've done that with he's the one who put this one through. So under the prorogue, Bill C-293 does not fall on the floor, or fail on the floor, as
Right.
they call it. It actually continues. And here's what's happened. It's suspended in the Senate right now. Now, according to, we read the rule books and we did a whole bunch of research, and basically, it depends on who you talk to. The most authoritative source we found, we believe, is basically the one who spoke as sort of head of the opposition, Senator Plett, during the Freedom Convoy, and which was essentially the speech that led to Trudeau deciding to pull it from the Senate and just stop the whole idea of trying to get the Emergency Measures Act law, or whatever was exact words of the act. So this gentleman's office says that no, it's going to go back to the introduction at first reading when the Parliament resumes. Parliament resumes and the Senate resumes on after the 24th of March, which means that it's going to be going into first reading. Now, you might thought, oh, great, so it's right back to the start. Well, you know what? How long it would take to catch up to where it is now, which is essentially all that's happened is it's gone into second reading. They did the introduction of it. They read out, that it's now being introduced, and there was it was supposed to be 45 minutes. The person took 8 minutes, and in that 8 minutes, of course, I mentioned before when I was on with you that the person quoted Yuval Harari in a positive fashion. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. So anyway, the idea that this is going to slow down, it'll have to go back to the beginning. Listen, they could do this in a week or two. They could get it back to where it is now. I mean, if they really wanted to, they could do it in 2 days. But, usually at their speed, they could do it in a week or two. They could get it back into where it was before the prorogue. And from there, here's the problem. What if Mark Carney is in charge at this point? I mean, Mark Carney, that's another thing we got to get to in this talk. I don't want to go on a departure with him now, but suffice it to say, this man is the most uber powerful person. I mean, it makes, I mean, his power, economic power, connections, and political power around the world with the globalists is, I mean, he's on the level of Mark Bloomberg and Jamie Dimon and people like this who were instrumental in pushing through the what was it called? The net zero agenda, and getting that adopted at the global level and at a meeting, in the Rio meeting, I believe. Anyway, it means that this man is going, if he's appointed prime minister, which obviously he's the first choice for them, because he was a former banker of England and the former banker of Canada. He was a member of the Club of Rome, not to mention, of course, connected to the WF completely. And he's a UN special envoy for climate action and finance.
Oh,
He
what do
is
we
the
got
one.
here? He's also ties with Harper, who hired him. Go figure.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. So if he is at the helm of the Liberal Party, which is at this point, he's our most likely prime minister, I can see him being ruthless about just jamming through C293, even though it's in the Senate, because it's 80 of the 105 senators were appointed by Trudeau. He could do all kinds of things to influence them to make sure they push that through fast before the election in October. Well, people are saying, well, what about there's a non-confidence vote? Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, the NDP have been, how many times has this man cried wolf, Singh, and said, oh, that's it, I've had enough now, I'm going to support a non-confidence vote? He said this at least 3 or 4 times. And each time he continues voting to support them. So you can't count on Singh not supporting Trudeau. I wouldn't. Not to mention that there's all sorts of dirty things they could do. They could say, well, because of what's going on, we need more time to study what's going on within the American, with Trump taking power. We think it's in our best interest to prorogue longer. And
Yeah.
just, all it takes is a month or two for, Mark Carney at the table, doing his thing with the globalists and implementing everything. They could do a lot of damage.
These bastards, they'll get away with whatever you let them get away with. And we've let them get
Exactly.
away with yet another thing, proroguing Parliament. And everyone's lost their minds. And even me, it didn't occur to me. One of the things about proroguing government is that, it's just Trudeau at the wheel now. So what is our last resort now? RCMP or military? Like there's no other checks against Trudeau?
Well, I don't even think the RCMP and the military are checks because he's in charge of them. No, there are zero checks and balances at this point. I mean, there is a check and balance. It's called the Governor General. She has the power to fire the Prime Minister. She can literally fire any of the premiers and the Prime Minister, and she can call a new election. She could also appoint the leader of the official opposition as the Prime Minister. She has uber power. But the problem is, she is chosen by Trudeau. She is, unfortunately, I have to mention this. She is, I understand, Inuit, and the Inuit under Trudeau's UN, UNDRIP plan are getting 20 million acres up in the northwest there, and they believe that they're getting this land. Of course, it's like the fine print in the treaties that the Indians signed, 200 years ago. There's stuff in there where it looks like actually the UN is going to own the land and King Charles, and they're going to be the custodians of it, which means that they'll have very limited rights as to what they can do with the land. They don't own it, and they're essentially going to be they're being tricked into thinking that they're getting this land. So this is now imagine that the person that's under the influence of this belief, that is now the Governor General, and Trudeau especially appointed her, and she's representing now her people in the Arctic and stuff, and way up in northern Canada. Do you think she's going to cause him to lose his position and then have a conservative government, or from her perspective, worse, the People's Party of Canada involved in government, who are going to look long and hard, the PPC, at the whole, well, they've already said, Maxine's already said, we know this, that they're not going to continue funding the UN and funding the WHO and the World Economic Forum and participating in all of their nonsense. I mean, it's not just nonsense, it's enslavement agendas, starting with Bill C-293 and going on. I mean, it's all built on, this well, quite frankly, it's a psyop. This whole man-made climate change. They stopped saying the man-made part now, but it is. That's what they're saying. It's man-made. 0.04% of the atmosphere that's actually carbon dioxide, 4/100ths of 1%, which, by the way, in geological time, it's at near an all-time low at this point. And the more what's happened, it's gone up a little bit, is causing mass greening of the earth and more ecosystem, diversity and more plants and more animals. And it's wonderful for the earth. It's plant food. The idea that we're facing, melting glaciers and ice caps and climate alarmist disaster dystopia is absolute nonsense. The climate change is not from CO2 increasing. The climate change is from sun cycles. And any independent geologists and climatologists, not any, but the vast majority of them, well, they've actually looked at the ice cores, they've looked at the rock formations. It's quite clear. The sun cycles, every once in a while, the 1 year cycle and the 7 year cycle and the 11 and the 100, these all sort of coincide, and you get a period of a lot of solar radiation. What does that do? It heats up the planet. And what happens is 400 to 800 years later, remember we discussed this before, it temporarily, that extra CO2 goes into the ocean, and it's like a carbon sink. And then after 400 to 800 years, it comes into the atmosphere, and you do have higher CO2. So note the order of operations. Sun heats up planet, 400, 800 years later, CO2 goes up. Not CO2 goes up and then temperature goes up. Okay, everybody? One independent variable versus
cause and effect. Yeah.
Cause and effect. Okay, they got completely inverted. They've been smoking people with this for 20 years, and the CBC has been repeating it like crazy, and David Suzuki and all these people who are, totally brainwashed they took over a bunch of very good green people back in the 70s who were concerned about pollution. And we all don't want to have polluted waterways and polluted air. These were good environmentalists, but they, unfortunately, they weaponized that. They've weaponized what it means to the most great thing about humanity: care for your community, care for the environment. They've weaponized that to get people to embrace an ideology which is going to convince them voluntarily to accept this whole carbon-based economy thing, which is really the 15-minute city, about creating confinement in 15-minute cities and having everything measured, and all of your ability to buy food or go anywhere, you're eventually confined. And anyway, so it's a whole enslavement agenda and taking away all the wealth from the middle class. Anyway, so I won't.
Why don't we use that to switch over to what's going on with the fires in California?
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes, that I must say that's the one thing that in this past week or so has just really caught my attention. I mean, I'm sure it's caught everyone's attention. And I mean, I've never seen anything like it. The video I've seen just in the last day really blew me away. It's an aircraft that's coming in for a landing in LA, and it's in sort of in the nighttime or just about nighttime, and you see just vast areas of land just covered in fire. It looks like like a painting of, the Revelations or something. I mean, the burning of cities. I mean, it's just huge areas.
Burning of Carthage.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really, really tragic. And the thing is, as I mentioned, I think earlier, maybe before the interview, that this is an actual great example for people to look at, because this, you can see quite clearly that this was engineered. I mean, with Lahaina, it was a little less, easy to see, but this is very clear to see. For example, let's look at a few things. For number one, everyone has probably seen by now the Palisades Reservoir, which was built for the very purpose of providing water to put out firefighting Palisades, was emptied. It's 177 million gallons of water, plenty of water to put out the fire. It was empty 2 months ago. Now,
Why?
do that? Right? And so the government's response, oh, well, we had to take it down for maintenance. Oh, really? And so people did some digging and found out, and okay, let's see the schedules for maintenance. And there is no maintenance schedule. There is nothing being done to that reservoir. It was just empty, bone dry. Number one. Number two, we know they passed these environmental policies to not divert water. Like, there's a whole bunch of water coming up from up north that's coming out of the mountains that they're essentially dumping into the ocean because They're afraid of the smelts that are in the freshwater lakes. By the way, these smelts, these are little minnows essentially, are an invasive species put in by the environment. You can't even do anything with them. They're using that as an excuse to deprive the whole LA and Southern California from enough water to be able to put out fires, to be able to, grow food, all this kind of stuff. So that's a problem. And apparently Trump, when he got in the last, not now, but the previous time, he immediately saw the problem with California, and he made changes to federal regulations, and he negotiated with the states involved and came back to Newsom and said, okay, I got you the water now. Just sign here, and you can have as much water as you want. He said, no, I don't think we're going to do that. We don't need the water. And so, I mean, you could see this is a setup, right? Newsom, we know, is a total globalist. He set this thing up in a number of ways. One, look at the mayor. Okay, the mayor is literally a communist from Cuba that went back in the 70s every 6 months in her youth to be trained again, and was involved in a group that was literally building bombs and exploding them on American soil. I mean, this was a communist terrorist and has continued to be a communist her whole career, and she's in charge of LA. It's just nuts. And of course, what did they do? They implement the whole DEI in the, the fire. Well, the firefighters, first of all, they cut like 1,700 of them. They've been slashing and burning the fire department. And then, so in addition to, draining the reservoir, which was done, they, December 24th, and even before that, but December 24th, I saw the thing on Twitter, I saw the document. They put out a memorandum, the fire department. No one is, we're not doing any testing of fire hydrants, because at the beginning of fire season, that's what they do. Because in the wintertime, when you have windstorms, that's what's fire season in California. And up here, it's the summers, right? Because it's, latitude difference. So they made it so that you can't test the fire hydrants. So, but some of the firefighters were so concerned about this, they actually, broke the rules, and they tested some, and they said, oh, to their horror, there's no water. And they reported up the chain, well, look, the whole city's going to burn. And of course, they were just stifled and ignored, and told to shut up, and probably threatened. And so basically, it's a whole setup catastrophe. And of course, the brush, let's not forget the brush. They didn't clear the brush for like 15 years. Now, I had a brief period in 2016 to 2019 where it was very much in my interest to disappear onto a small island in BC, not disappear, but, be very low profile. So I'm living in a Pacific Coast temperate rainforest it's called. And you have so much growth of trees. I mean, the rings between the trees were like almost like, I'd say a third to a half an inch. Whereas out here in Ontario, it's like teeny little rings. Why?
1 millimeter.
Yeah, you get 10 feet of water per year in that climate. It's so temperate that you can grow lettuce in your garden outside in January. And it's like living in like dinosaur land, these giant trees. I had like a tree that's 5 foot across right in my deck. The deck was built around it. And I was on the ocean. It was wonderful. But here's the thing, whenever the wind came, because they couldn't afford, with only 1,000 full-time population on Cortez Island, to actually clear all the trees that are nearing the power lines that grow so fast. It wasn't economical. It was far more economical just to say, okay, when the windstorms come, we turn the power off. Because that way, when the trees blow, because if they get too close to the power lines, they blow in the wind, in the winter storms, they touch the power lines, they ground out, and you get arc, you get sparks, and then you start a forest fire. Not acceptable. So what do? They should turn off the power. Well, they didn't turn off the power in LA. And then they lied about it. Said, no, we did turn the power off. Meanwhile, the video's right there. You see the trees bowing in the wind, hitting it, sparks flying. And then, it's just, they lie and they lie and they lie. They engineered this thing 9 ways to Sunday so they could take away this land. And also, BlackRock, all the developers, whatever, they're all down there already trying to buy the land. And they're going to build this 15-minute city in these areas, and probably multiple 15-minute cities. So anyway, the ruthlessness. I mean, there's loss of life involved, huge loss. Well, it's not that. I mean, so far the body count I think was 20. I mean, that's 21 is too many. But the amount of damage we're talking has at 150 billion. It's like, and it's not over yet. I mean, it's burning right now.
It's not just the damage. It's they weren't insured. Like there was no fire insurance.
Oh, that's the other thing. That's another clue. So 4 months before, all the fire insurance, like all the insurance companies that do property insurance in Southern California, they all canceled their policies just like in Lahaina, just like in Hawaii. They said no.
Would you say that's like a conspiracy? They knew it was coming, or were they just really smart and they're like, okay, we got a bunch of idiot government officials that aren't removing the brush. There's no
You know,
water. We know
well,
what's going to happen.
I would say that I wouldn't want to posit my belief that there was a conspiracy, because I mean the insurance companies are the most conservative places possible. The last thing they want to do is be liable for, some collusion or conspiracy. They were probably, if they're actuaries and they're investigators and such. They're so on par. I mean, let's not forget one of the biggest contributors to COVID data on deaths and the number of deaths that are happening is a guy who's getting all the insurance data. Ed Dowd, a former BlackRock fund manager, who's left the dark side, and he's spent all this time. He's a numbers guy, obviously, and he's quite wealthy, and I think he lives in Hawaii. And he's the one who put the numbers together and found that the insurance data was quite clear, that the life insurance about all this excess all-cause mortality being not just 3 standard deviations, but like 5 and 10 standard deviations above normal, which is like a 1 in a 500-year or 1,000-year event. So that's obviously indicating, and this is exactly when the vaccines came out, and it's still up elevated. And you know what the most recent is for children, by the way? 22% excess mortality in the U.S. That means if let's say that, I don't know, 10,000 children, let's say 100,000 children a year die. That means 120,000 are dying. That's 20,000 kids per year. So, but it's probably bigger than that, right? But anyway, so back to the topic. So I don't think necessarily there was collusion or conspiracy by the insurance companies. They just looked at what was coming. Well, this is obvious what's going to happen. They're draining the reservoirs. They haven't cleared the brush. And there's these communists and globalists and DEI thing going on, and the fire department isn't checking the. No, pull the plug on this. This is way too risky, right? So I think that's all we need. It doesn't really matter if it was a conspiracy or not. The point is, it was predictable. It's within the realm of predictability, if you do all these things, that you're going to end up with the most largest conflagration in history. And therefore, you're going to be able to burn down everything and build the 15-minute city.
My friend was here last week. He's from California, LA, and he just came up. He had to cut his trip short, go back.
Wow.
I look at him. He believes in climate change, and I have a feeling that every single person that lost everything in LA, all their home, everything, they're going to blame climate change, not incompetence or malice.
It reminds me of the people that are in a hospital and they're dying, and it's obviously caused by the vaccine, and they're going, well, I'm so glad that I took the vaccines. I did the right thing, and they're literally dying. And it's when people have been brainwashed, and that's what it is, right? I'm going to mention it again because I think it's important. That part of the problem, probably one of the biggest problems we face right now, is so many of the public believe in this climate change myth. I'm sorry, climate change isn't a myth. That happens all the time. Climate's always changing. It always has throughout history. But man-made, the idea that we're so powerful that we're changing the climate is so believed by so many that they're accepting the false narrative of man-made climate change. So they're going to accept the carbon credit economy. They're going to accept having to be forced into 15-minute cities, being rationed, not being allowed to eat meat anymore because, it causes CO2 or something. I mean, so we got to educate these people. And one of the things to understand is the brainwashing. Here's how it works. When you put the existential threat of death into people, which is what they were doing, not only with COVID, with this 3.4% mortality, but with the climate change thing, saying, the ice caps are melting. By 2030, we're not going to have, everything's going to be underwater along the coast. We won't be able to grow food because there'll be desertification in the western provinces in Canada and in the States as well. We're going to die. And you put that and you repeat that in the news every frickin' week or every couple days now with the CBC constantly for 10, 15 years. Unfortunately, there's 2 mechanisms of mind control there. One is, we know that if you play, like, this is what Goebbels, right, Hitler's propaganda guy, invented, that if you play messages over and over and over and over to people, they start to believe it. And we know when you involve the threat of death to people, this causes trauma. And when you're under trauma, psychological trauma, and someone is saying, it's okay, we've got the solution, it's okay, we're going to take care of you, we just have to get down the CO2, you have to live in 50-minute cities, you have to pay more for your gasoline now. In fact, sorry, we're going to take the cars too, but that, they tell them that later. And people will believe it because they are so frightened and traumatized. And this goes back to studies back in this, the 50s and the 60s and the 70s with both the KGB then and now the FSB and the CIA, where they found that if you confined people or at least socially isolated them and traumatized them with negative fear messaging all every day, they would cave in and they would start to believe everything they were told, and they wouldn't even look at opposing information that contradicted what they've been programmed to believe. And that's the problem, because in order for Canada, for example, to have Canadians take action that's needed right now, for example, contacting the Governor General, for example, voting for a party that's going to actually get us out of these UN agendas and the WEF and the WHO, people need to have a reason. They need to understand. Do you want to end up like LA? I mean, if they're going to torch LA, why won't they just torch Calgary or, torch Edmonton or, I don't know, Regina, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, Thunder Bay. Well, they did torch Jasper already, right? And don't forget, they torched Lytton. Lytton, where in BC, this is where Dr. Hoff, in the very beginning in 2021, when the shots were first being given, in the first quarter of 2021, I believe it was, and he was this South African doctor, with a British accent, and he's basically got about 800 patients, and they're all First Nations, and he's injecting them all. They're all lining up, thinking they're so lucky to be at the beginning. They would had priority. Notice what the globalists did. Of course, they lined up the old people and the Indians, and gave them the shot first. It's just sickening. So anyway, he was getting the signal coming back in his patient's health, massive amounts of severe adverse events. So he goes public, and guess what happens? 2 weeks later, the whole city's burnt down. Now, coincidence? Maybe. It's the first case in Canada of someone raising the alarm. It reminds me of the Helen Grews case here, the detective with the police department up here in North Toronto. I'm trying to remember the name of the detachment, but basically she raised the issue that she was noticing that Pfizer, first of all, she was getting reports from first responders and doctors and nurses saying we were seeing an alarming rise in infants dying, like just being born dead. And then she looked and she found some Pfizer data. It shows out that there were like 29 out of the 30 pregnant women that got the jab aborted, like had an abortion immediately. And she started to investigate this as a criminal thing, and they shut her down so hard. It's in court right now, still years later. She's lost everything. She's lost her job. They're accusing her of all kinds of things, and there's a huge advocacy group trying to defend her. My point is, what that did was that frightened 70,000 police officers across Canada to not ever investigate any of the criminality of a COVID jab shots, and for that matter, the remdesivir that killed 53% of people who got it in the hospitals. The full pressure
you could
so,
extend this like
yeah.
Sorry, the Helen Bruce was for law enforcement. People like Charles Hoff was for medical. Same with Mel Boucher or whatever his name was. A lot of whistleblowers, like they're just going after these people to make an example. And these guys are monsters. These people in government, like they are absolute monsters. They know they're doing wrong. They don't want to stop. And they're just like, we're just cattle to these people. They're like, we'll just get these moron people out of the way.
Yes, exactly. And that's where there's an opportunity here to wake people up. If they simply just look back at the things that I've said about the LA fires being engineered, look on an independent news source, i.e. X, which, by the way, is exactly split in terms of the number of Republicans versus Democrats. Basically, all the other ones are skewed usually to the left or skewed, maybe a little bit to the right. But the X is right down the middle, and more media, mainstream media, gets their stories more and more from X than they do from any other source. Anyway, just go on X, follow the right people, and you will find, and you can verify everything I'm saying about this. You can see the picture of the Palisades reservoir being empty. You can see the fact that the brush for 15 years hasn't been cleared, at least. You can see all of these things we're saying about the fire hydrants were basically empty. You can see that they slashed 1,700 firefighters. You can see the DEI thing and the fire chief, basically making this announcement, and it was a memo that went out to everybody saying no inspecting of the fire being in fire season. They always test the fire hydrants. Well, that was stopped as of December 24th, just like a month before the fire. So it's all there, less than a month. So it's all there, and then you realize that this was engineered because it's right there. You can look at this information to verify, and then you ask yourself, maybe there is something to this idea that these people are not just trying to quote unquote save the planet, which is actually it's a false statement. They're trying to save the planet. I mean, look at them. They're coming in on private jets, one person per jet, basically, one billionaire per jet into Davos, hundreds and hundreds of these private jets each year. They and even there's Mark Carney. I've got a post on him with like 6 or 7 tweets I collected. Turns out that one of the companies that he was involved with, was very high in ownership of that company, they actually cheated and reported wrong numbers for their ESG scores so that they would look good, because of course he has to look good because he's like representing the whole ideology. Anyway, so these people are absolute liars, they're cheats, and they don't care. They look at us like cattle. That's literally how they look at us. The World Economic Forum, these elites that want for the eugenesis, depopulation agenda, we are cattle to them. They do not care. And then you look at what's happened in LA. You look at all the lives that have been destroyed, but all the lives that have been also, the survivors have lost everything because of the cancellation of the fire insurance. So not only are they broke, they probably lost, all of their belongings, all of their family photos, everything that was important to them, their furniture, all their toys, children, everything is gone. And now they have to try and make it somewhere else. And the devastation to the businesses, family-run businesses that have been going for generations, gone, erased forever. And now that land being picked up by uber wealthy development holding companies and such to develop 15-minute cities. It's disgusting. So it's an opportunity for people to wake up.
Matthew, let's shift gears
Mm-hmm.
to, you sent me this Substack article, and I was actually
Yes,
really blown
go
away.
go on that. Go on that, please do.
So I'm not going to read it line for line, but I'm just going to. It's basically a critique of this 51st state thing, and he's saying how since 1867 the government's just been designed to beat us down. So one thing I wanted to pick up, America's motto, I always say it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. I try to act edgy, but it's life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah,
Canada's is peace, order, and good governance. If I was going to put it in a word, Canada is democracy. America is about the republic. The
exactly.
individual sovereignty here is about the collective. Do you
Yes.
want to comment on that or disagree or whatever?
No, I think that this article, by the way, which I hope we'll have the link to the Substack and the letter that's with it, is a fantastic summary of where we are right now, what Canada's facing with the prorogue, with Mark Carney, the whole thing. It's all here, and the analysis is brilliant. This guy has written a book on the topic essentially, and he is writing this because Andrew Coyne, a journalist, said regarding the 51st state idea, you either stand up for your country or you're a traitor, and binary choice. And he said, no, it's not a binary choice. It's way more nuanced than that. There's a whole history here. There's a reason why Canadians are seriously entertaining this. Look what's happened to Canada. Look at all of our institutions. Look at all our freedoms. Anyway, so that's my introduction to this, and I highly recommend people have a look at this. It's continue. I just
Well,
agree totally with it.
we'll kind of get there. So he's covering this one guy, loyal. If you're Canadian wearing a MAGA hat, you're a traitor. And there's another guy, Andrew Coyne. This one, are you with Canada or with Trump? Like this word traitor, like first of all, that's a very serious word to use. Secondly, we have 12 traitors in Parliament, or 11. Like,
Exactly. Who are the traitors? The real traitors in Canada are those 12 people that have been caught taking money from foreign governments to provide information, and their names are being withheld from us. But anyway, continue.
yeah, and okay. Before I continue, I should say I wasn't born in this country. I'm not saying that we should. My ancestors didn't die for this country. I'm not weighing into this, but this article, this social media post, it really gets to the heart of why so many people are not freaking out um, over this 51st state argument. So I just want to make that.
Absolutely. And
And
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say in this article, he actually talks about the actual going all the way back to the early the mid-century and how Canada culture evolved and how there was this disenfranchisement with the Laurentian elites by the Quebecois, and then how Trudeau then basically, because they were kind of anglicized them, right? And then basically they, under Trudeau, they took off. He basically, it was also Charles de Gaulle make that statement about "Viva le Québec" or something like that, and he said that just the right time to trigger all of that. They were just so pissed off, the Quebecers, about trying to be anglicized that, well, the FLQ started. Remember, I went back to that. I mentioned the FLQ earlier. That's the only time I can think of in Canadian history where we actually had some sort of a threat to the country, because they were literally, kidnapping government ministers and killing them. So that was bad. So then they go to the present. He takes it all the way to the present and shows how we've completely destroyed the culture in Canada and taken away the freedoms and the liberties that made Canada a place that was a great place to raise children. You could come here, as this guy's, he talks about his parents came here and they got a farm and they raised their children, but then gradually, from Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau onwards, it was a series of social experiments, you know, multiculturalism and then, eventually, this whole environmental thing that was actually taking good environmental ideas and then co-opting these people with a bunch of false ideology to fearmonger and create people's acceptance of that we shouldn't have children, for God's sakes, because there's too many people on the earth. I mean, this nonsense. Anyway,
I
so
think this.
he does an incredible job talking about, for example, how there are literally immigrants in Canada that have come here and settled in the last 10 to 15, 20 years and are now leaving. In some cases, if they had good ties with their home country, they're just going back to their home country. They can no longer see this as a viable place to live after what they did in the trucker convoy with seizing those bank accounts and tamping down. And there's still people with seized bank accounts. They still don't have their money yet. I mean, it's become the whole trans thing with the Soji goals. This is UN thing. The trans thing is not a bottom up. It's top down, as well as the DEI thing, and that the idea that if you're white and you're male, you're automatically an oppressor, and that everybody else, that's why we have to not have merit-based admissions to universities and merit-based job application acceptance, but based on the color of your skin. I mean, it's racism. It's overt racism. Anyway, people have been one social experiment after another, and these new immigrants that have been here for even 10, 15 years are saying that's it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it staying here. We can't bring up our children here. I mean, they're having drag queen story hour in kindergarten, and they have to choose pronouns. Oh, and they can put them on hormone drugs because they saw them a boy playing with a doll, and they say, oh gosh, you're the girl. We're going to give you some hormones, and without even parents' permission. I mean, and then when they're sterile, of course, that's the whole UN WHO agenda: reduce the population. They become sterile. If you're on those things for 6 months or more, that's it. So I understand why people are leaving the country. Not just the wealthy people, but just people who are really, really focused on family. They're saying, why I can't stay here anymore. Anyway, go ahead. I'm going into too much detail about what I read here.
Well, you covered a lot of the stuff, but the beauty of this guy's post is he's answering the question that these people aren't asking. Like, why are so many Canadians supporting Trump, or at least not calling for Trump's assassination? Like, why are so many Canadians not outraged?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it has to do with this concept of a republic. Like, Canadians want a republic. They want a rule of law that we don't have anymore. And the elites don't have an answer for that, because all they have to do is define what is Canada's identity. What does it mean to be Canadian? What's the benefit of being Canadian as opposed to American? And the only two things they have right now, which is kind of flimsy, is one, we don't have guns. Okay, I don't see that as a win. Two, we have universal health care. If you take those two things away, the two countries can just naturally merge.
Exactly. And let's just unpack some of the terms here. to make sure that especially the people in the middle, let's be clear what we're saying here. So Canada is a constitutional monarchy. The United States is not a constitutional monarchy. They said no, the heck with the king, because the king was coming in trying to conquer America and impose this giant tax on them. And anyway, so they had about more than the Boston Tea Party. I mean, they had a lot of they had a big war and between the North and the South, etc. And the Democrats, of course, were supporting slavery, and the Republicans weren't. They were against it. Anyway, I digress. And they have a republic means that the Constitution has, just like Canada, we have, in the Bill of Rights, from the BNA Act, I think, or earlier after the BNA Act, we injected a Bill of Rights, and then the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But the actual teeth it has is very limited because we're not a republic. A republic doesn't matter who takes power, whether it's Trump or Biden, opposite ends of the thing. Doesn't matter who takes power. You cannot change. You have to respect constitutional rights, or you will be sued. You will be sued, and it will cost a huge amount of money to pay off people whose constitutional rights are violated. But we're talking millions in these cases, and there's over 380 million people or something. It's massive. So you can't do that. Whereas in Canada, because we're not a republic, the constitutional rights are only at the government's whim, essentially. They can say, well, we're basically one election away from some party coming in, i.e. what's just happened with the Liberal Party, and saying, you know what, we're just not going to pay attention to the constitutional rights. And not to mention, we have this notwithstanding thing, which means any province at any time can opt out. So that's the difference, is we do not have guaranteed rights. And a republic gives you guaranteed rights. It doesn't matter who's in power. You cannot violate constitutional rights without consequence.
I want to read something here. This kind of resonated with me because I'm an immigrant. So if you just bear with me. I, like many others from immigrant families, worked hard to assimilate, to learn and internalize Canadian history and Canadian values, to build ties and put down roots in Canada in ways that honor the sacrifices made by previous generations who built what drew us to these shores. To see our post-national government encourage hatred of our culture, to see our government cater to those who go out of their way not to assimilate, to watch others import their ethnic conflicts onto our streets. I feel this too. Like, I want to be a part of this country and I want to help it. And I look up and we got this joker clown prime minister who says we're a post-nationalist state. That's part of the reason why people aren't pushing back against this 51st state suggestion.
Exactly. That's in a nutshell. You're absolutely correct. That terminology, a post-national state, is the objective of the New World Order. Because if you have states that no longer say, okay, we're not a state anymore, we're just a collection of people that are all mixed together, we have no national character anymore. They say they're for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Guess what? They're destroying diversity. You think about it. When you go to Europe, the big exciting thing about going to Europe is you go to Greece, you get all this fantastic Greek culture and their food and their music, and they're all like 90% or more, 95% Greek Orthodox Christians. You go to France and you get a whole different thing there. A lot of them are Catholic and they speak French and they have French food and French, music, and it's the most wonderful thing to be able to travel. It used to be, until the EU, and then what's happened is basically they've done the whole mass migration thing as well, and they're trying to. That's the globalist New World Order agenda. That every country is just a whole bunch of diverse people with no national character anymore. You go from France to Germany to Greece to Portugal, and you're going to see the same culture. Why do they want to do that? Because then people will subsume themselves to accepting global government, because after all, there's no national character or national pride to push back. It's sickening. It's really sickening. It's a battle plan.
Anyway. Yeah, they're getting rid of the culture.
Yeah. By the way, I'm also technically an immigrant because I was born in Toronto, but my parents were both Americans at the time. So,
well, you were born here, but it's one point of conflict. People get, I'm not even going there. I don't want the headache. So, but I want to read this one part. It goes, how many more generations should we stay trapped in this never-ending cycle of voting in the other guy to save us from the current guy? The reason I bring that up is I'm running for the PPC. So the guy who, this is Stephen It's Julius Rochelle who's responding to this guy,
Yeah,
and this guy Andrew Coyne. And if you look, he's got all these flags.
I know, I
Max
know.
put out a funny one. Did you see this? Why does foreign agent keep
Yeah,
interfering in Canadian politics?
exactly. He's got the Ukraine and Israel, and what's this the cross one? The cross is that Switzerland? No, that's Spain. I'm not sure. I'm not.
That's Romania.
Oh, that's
I don't.
Romania. Oh, Romania,
What is
by
that?
the way. If it was Romania, what an interesting, because I was going to bring up Romania. The EU has invalidated the election of Romania now. 2 or is it 3 votes? They've said, no, we don't like the results. We think there's Russian influence. And they canceled the election. And then they did it again and then canceled it again. They're interfering because they're, of course, electing a populist, because, probably non-globalist government. So that really raises the question, is this is actually all part of the UN plan, is to have regional governments. So your regional government of Europe, the EU, and then the regional government for North America, otherwise known as the North American Union, and then one for Africa, one for the Middle East. And what does this buy us? It means that some central government somewhere in our region is deciding our local, governance. It's a very bad idea.
Yeah, this EU thing, it reminds me of something else. I'm going to get all the facts wrong, but like the European Constitution specifically said that only a nation state within the EU can bring a case at the EU court against another nation state. And then some jackass trucker goes through Germany and he brings a court case and it makes its way up to the German courts and they give it to the European court and the court's like, yeah, we'll take it. And it set a precedent that anyone can bring it. It doesn't have to be nation member states, and they're doing this. Like I'm guessing the EU doesn't have jurisdiction here over what goes on in local elections.
Well, they actually got involved and they invalidated the Romanian election.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know, but I don't think they have that. Well, I'm guessing here. I'm guessing they don't have that authority. These are sovereign nations.
well, I think that it's a case of writing it as they go along. Like they're just basically running roughshod, just like the Trudeau government was running roughshod over the Canadian people during COVID. They're just breaking the rules all the way through. It's really sickening.
Here's another comment at the end. The last 9 years are merely a symptom of a much bigger problem that cuts to the heart of our parliamentary system. I'm telling you, like the
Mhm.
main theme of this guy's
Mhm.
post is we don't have a republic. Like our problems are coming out.
Exactly.
You call it the monarchy, but the parliamentary system, it's an absolute democracy, and it's just 51%, but it doesn't even work as well as that.
Yeah, it was only like 3 or 4, maybe 6 months ago that all of a sudden I really understood that why the American, basically why America became so successful. It's because they were a republic, and a republic defends individual liberties in the Constitution, and it doesn't matter what government comes into power, they cannot take those away. Up in Canada, in the constitutional monarchy, we're one election away from a government coming in that's just going to run roughshod over our constitutional rights with no recourse. It's
Yeah,
very
it
bad.
doesn't help. He's packed the Senate and the courts, so we're in a really bad position.
Correct, correct. And don't forget that our head of state is King Charles III, who's well, his father, Philip, on his deathbed said, I hope I come back as a deadly virus to solve the overpopulation problem. He actually said that. And then he was interviewed about by a serious journalist in the UK, at least the 6 months before he died. He was, kind of, sitting in a chair and he was fine. He wasn't like keeled over in bed. And he said, oh, yeah, my biggest concern about the environment is we've got to get rid of more people. There's too many people. And it was like, oh my God. Like, so we know that this Malthus guy back in, I don't know, 1780 or something wrote a book about, there's too many people in the world and we've got to figure out a way to, reduce the population. And the first people that he went to were the royalty, the kings and queens in Europe to convince, and they all loved it, right? They all loved it. Oh yeah, yeah, we're going to have more control and get rid of the people that we don't want. Yeah, and now it's taken them 200 and some years, but now we're right in the thick of it. Lahaina, and then LA's burning, and now Europe is going up to crap, and now Canada, right? Anyway, go ahead.
Things are escalating. This echoing exactly what you said. I'm tired of building a future on a foundation that can be swept away at a moment's notice because some new Muppet rises to power and uses the absence of meaningful checks and balances to impose their vision on us and
That's right.
ignores our voices when we try to say no.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes. And this is important. This is important. If we get, if one thing people got out of this interview is that we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. We're now aware, awake and aware that our Constitution does not protect us because we are not a republic. And that's where, in the very conclusion of this, he says, you know, you got to remember that, my loyalties is to my family, and to my friends and my community. And what's best for these people is what I care about. And so it turns out that the way this is happening in Canada, this 51st state idea, I mean, look at it this way. If we're looking at a difference of being led by the nose by the uniparty system, you glossed over briefly the idea of voting strategically. So basically, you get sick of the Liberals, so then you have to vote PC because you're afraid the Liberals will win again. So basically, both of these parties are part of the uniparty. They both are globalist parties. So when you want to have a real alternative, it's impossible because we don't have proportional representation. Not possible. It's very, very difficult because we don't have proportional representation. Which, by the way, Trudeau campaigned on, and then within 6 months, lied and said, "Oh well, Canadians don't want that. We asked them; they don't want it." Yeah, they just want to stay in power forever. Anyway, so I don't know. I got off on a tangent. I forget what I was going to.
Oh, it's okay. Trudeau's strategy worked. I mean, he lied to the
Yes,
people and he
yes,
said, we'll give you proportional representation. And the people bought his lies. And then
yeah,
after he's like, screw you. I don't need you people.
yeah, yeah. Just the awakening is happening. People are becoming more and more aware. They've been lied to. They've been essentially brainwashed in many of these things, at least with COVID and with this Green New Deal, but also that just the repeated messaging since basically the late 70s, early 80s that there's too many people in the world, and that we got to get rid of people, and people are also unfortunately. Um, Unfortunately, they don't understand that if you do not face to reality and stand up, history shows you can never comply your way out of tyranny, and it will only get worse. Bullies are encouraged when you just take it. They think, "Aha! Now I can really get after them. They're weak." And the countries that stop tyranny are where the population stands up and says, "Nope, we're not going to do this." And all it takes is like I don't know, 5% or 10%, or I think it's 5% or something. I mean, the American Revolution, it was like 3% or something. So, if people stand up and just say, no, we're not going to take another bloody pandemic and bird flu and having to wear masks and 6 foot distancing and for some bioweapon that's been leaked out of a lab paid for by the sweater wearing guy. No, we're not doing that again. If people stand up to that and say, no, we're not going to do that. And if people stand up and say, write a letter to the Governor General or call them and say, look, we need an election now. This is wrong. What's happening? This is essentially a dictatorship. This is not a legal prorogue. We're in a very vulnerable time in our nation's history with what's going on in the United States and elsewhere. And so we need an election now. People have to stand up. And that's the way we save our country.
Amen. I just, before we ended, I just saw a comment. It's not
Mm-hmm.
related to you or I. It's from Ella Bobbin. Universal healthcare is so poor now. My father would be alive if he could have paid. I'm sorry for your loss and sorry that the healthcare
So am
system.
I. And unfortunately, you're getting more and more of this in the media. And there's this, I got to mention the Cloward Piven strategy come up. I think I might mention this in the previous interview that a couple of New York State University professors, like in the 1970s, they were Marxists, okay? And they came up with this idea that if you overwhelm a country with new immigrants that are not highly skilled and educated, and overwhelm the social safety net, the healthcare system, the welfare system, the education system, and I mean, we know the numbers now. It's like 85,000 a year per new immigrant that's coming in, and they're getting paid. Okay, uh, like 20, 25,000 more than the average person makes. So a family makes or something. And what you do is you overwhelm everything. And not to mention that when you drop a bioweapon, well, you don't drop it. You use mind control to persuade people to take a jab. Coercion, not just mind control, but coercion. You will lose your job if you do not take this jab, which means you might not be able to support your family. That's coercion, which, by the way, is a violation of the Nuremberg Code, which could result in basically being hung. That is a serious crime, and also without informed consent and being coerced. That's we hung all those people. Well, there's not that many, but the people were hung in Germany and at the end of the Second World War for. So
The
yeah,
good old days.
the good old days. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, back when we had, no, I'm not saying the Holocaust was the good old days. I'm saying when we had, actual punishment for the criminals.
Well, there was at least symbology. I mean, let's face it, that there was only, about 100 people hung at the most. Meanwhile, between 3,000 and 9,000 Nazi mind control scientists and Nazi rocket scientists in 1945 were flown across from Germany to America and seated in research hospitals, the CIA, and NASA. And those Nazi influencers are still in power today and are their descendants. So there was a lot of crimes that were not, and people who were not punished, including Mengele, the evil sick man that caused so much suffering in the camps and death and horrible things. Anyway, yeah. So but at least we got the Nuremberg trials, which were symbolically meant to frighten future people who were thinking of doing such things again. And there's the Shavar. Is it something Shavar? Is it Eva Shavar? She's an actual survivor, and she's got some great videos on YouTube. Just look up Shavar, and she will tell you that what's been going on in the last 5 years is exactly what she saw going on leading up to what really happened in the camps. It was really horrific. So anyway, people need to wake up and get involved and embrace the opportunity to make a difference for your children.
So Matthew, we just passed the 1 hour mark. We can end it there. Do you want to do a plug for your space tomorrow? I hear you have a very special guest.
Yes, yes, actually, yeah. Do stop by the on tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. And the Stop CT9293 committee. We have weekly spaces, although we took a week or so off since the Christmas. But we're starting this week, and our guest is a very interesting man who, in addition to being a very informed and aware candidate in the election, has very much been able to take his life experience and get involved in actually social media and doing interviews and across all different subjects and bringing information to try and make people awake and aware. And of course, that's Heyman
I was going
Asghari.
to say, sounds like a dreamy guy. It's a very handsome, God's gift to women.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. Uh, yeah. So just 7:30. The link will be up, and just go to Stop C293 COMTEE. Again, that's on Twitter. So the @ Stop C293 COMTEE. And that will you'll be able to find that before the tomorrow. You'll see that link, and you can click on it on tomorrow night, 7:30 Eastern p.m. and tune in. That'll be great.
Well, Matthew, as always, thank you very much for coming on. I really enjoy these. It's mostly you talking, so it's really a gift of it. It's an educational gift to me. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to talk with you, Payman, and I really support what you're doing, your advocacy, and this is linked to C293 too, because you've been really awake and aware and ahead of that curve and getting that message out. So I really appreciate that. Okay,
You're welcome, and anything I can do.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.